We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a real treat this afternoon, obviously, with President Clinton able to be here. It's not very often that one of the handful of individuals who's actually a leader on this planet can focus the kind of energy that he focuses on the problems that really make a difference, and so it's a real honor having the President here. Let me put his life and his role into some perspective relative to what we're here to do. We're here, as we talked about at lunch, to take colleges and universities around the United States and teach with everything that we do and everything that we are about the importance of tackling climate change. We've all promised to become climate neutral moving forward. We're all focused on sustainability. We are going to be teachers. This man that's about to come through the door is a master teacher, an unbelievable teacher, and I think he teaches us 4 things that we need to know. First, embrace complexity. I've never seen anybody like him embrace complexity the way that he can. None of these problems are easy. They're all difficult. Embrace complexity. Second, we have to focus on the core issues that actually make a difference. Climate change makes a difference. Eradicating poverty makes a difference. Urban economic development makes a difference. We have to figure out how to, as he did, he has taught us, to advance through adversity. Advance through adversity. And then related to things, it's always and most often about partnerships. So he's taught us 4 things. I won't even talk about courage, because I think that's what it takes to go to North Korea and come back with some significant accomplishments. But it is the case that he's a master teacher. His foundation, the Clinton Foundation, is working on those issues. We're connected through the Climate Initiative. We're moving forward. I think he's here. Let's stand and recognize President Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael Crow, to the other event co-chairs, David Schein, Mary Spangler, Jonathan Wagey, and the Wagey Foundation. Thank you for co-hosting the event. Undersecretary Cantor, thank you for being here, and the Second Nature team. And ladies and gentlemen, I have just enjoyed the wonders of Chicago traffic jams. And I apologize for being late, but you were more comfortable than I was, if it makes you feel any better. I came here today with a longtime friend of Hillary's and mine, Kevin O'Keefe, who ran both our campaigns in Illinois, and we were reminiscing about this room. One of the happiest moments of my life occurred here. We had our victory party here on St. Patrick's Day, 1992, when I won the primary in Illinois and Michigan, and I knew that unless I was derailed in New York, which was a real life possibility, I would be the nominee of the Democratic Party for president. So every time I come back to the Palmer House, I'm very happy. We had my farewell event here when I left the White House. And the only picture I have of my father, who was killed before I was born in a car wreck, and my mother together is having dinner at the Palmer House. So I am very grateful to you for meeting here and for having me here. I want to thank the University President's Climate Commitment for your dedication to reducing greenhouse gases, and particularly for continuing it in this tough economic time when a lot of universities have lost endowment funds and have tough decisions about how to spend money. You know, of course, or you wouldn't be here, that the investment will pay off not only in savings down the road, but also in saving the planet. Usually when I'm at events like this, and we just had Senator Harry Reid's third energy summit out in Las Vegas, Nevada, where we had people from all over the country talk about how this could be good economics, which is something I've been hammering home. And I guess I should back up and say this. Anything that any of you can do with the senators and representatives from your home state to demonstrate through what you are doing on your campuses that there are economically beneficial ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will be extremely helpful in the coming weeks as the Congress considers the climate change legislation that the President and the Secretary of State desperately need before the Copenhagen Climate Conference in December. We have got to pass a bill. It doesn't have to be a perfect bill, but it needs to be a good bill. If we do, then we'll have the leverage to go there and find ways, I believe, to engage China, India, the other big emitters, and come up with an agreement that is more comprehensive than the one we passed at Kyoto and one that will have more support. Already I'm encouraged that there'll be a really significant section on deforestation, which I think is important. It's about 18% of the global problem. And we couldn't get it into Kyoto because everybody said that it was too easy to cheat on deforestation. But I think now we have the measuring tools and the mechanisms to deal with it. It's something that our foundation also works on. So I want to say that before I get into my notes because I was afraid I'd forget it. And I know that a lot of you have enormous credibility with both Democratic and Republican members of the Congress and the House and the Senate from your states. And I never cease to be amazed that people are still in denial about the economic potential of doing this right. So whatever evidence you can point to from what you have done on your own campuses, I think is profoundly important. When I go around and do these events, I normally say that I spent more than 30 years in politics, and I loved every day of it. It's a good thing we got the 22nd Amendment, or they had to carry me out in a pine box, I guess. But I realized after I became an NGO that thinking back on my years in politics, an enormous percentage of our debates were about two questions. What are you going to do, and how much money are you going to spend on it? And public universities in particular know that's what they always go and lobby the legislatures about, right? And those questions are important, all right. But ever since I got into this work, and I guess I should say it's one of the most interesting things about my long marriage is that my wife and I have now switched roles, because for most of her life, she was a walking NGO. She was involved in non-governmental organizations when we started dating in law school, and she continued to be. She was the first person, I think, representing the United States when I was in the White House who regularly met with non-governmental organizations in Africa and India and other countries in South Asia, in Southeast Asia and Latin America. And those of us who do this work know we never have enough money to do whatever it is we're trying to do, including what I've tried to do with you in the partnership that we've had. So we spend more time thinking about a third question. Not what and how much, but how are you going to do what you're doing in a way that maximizes a positive impact no matter how much money you have or don't have. And I think the how question is going to be the most important question of the next 20 or 30 years. In fact, that's the question we have to answer for the Congress to get a good climate change bill. And that's the question we should be focused on in this Copenhagen Agreement to supplant the Kyoto Accord. We have to demonstrate how to do this in a way that actually has a transformational impact on our economy and the global economy in a way that generates more broadly based prosperity as well as saves the planet for our children and grandchildren. So that's what I want to talk about today. We know what we have to do. We've got to reduce greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050. We even have a general idea from studies about how much money the various constituent elements of meeting the 80% target would cost. What has not been answered is how we can do that so we make more than it costs, not just we Americans, but we the world over. How can we involve developing countries and prove that they don't have to have the same energy trajectory that we in Europe and Japan had in order to grow wealthier? Focusing on that how question, it seems to me, is the most important thing we can do. The American Council on Energy Efficiency has found that efficiency investments can provide up to half of our needed emissions reductions by 2050, saving in energy costs for consumers and businesses somewhere on the order of $2 trillion. So the obvious question is, will it cost more than $2 trillion to get the 50% reduction? The answer is no. If you look at the nearest thing we have that answers that question is a recent report by McKinsey, which says that if we invest $520 billion, we could cut energy in use for heating and power generation by 23%. That's more than the total consumption of Canada. And it would save almost $1.2 trillion on energy bills. So if you just extrapolate, we could save twice as much as we'll have to invest. The problem is the investments are made up front and the savings are realized over time, and there are no parallel financings. I will come to that later. It's one of the reasons it's important that universities lead the way here, because it's an educational endeavor for you. So if you accumulate the cash reserves to do this, it's also a very important part of your mission. But a big part of my mission is figuring out how to get the systems in America aligned so that we finance energy efficiency the same way we'd finance a coal-fired power plant. And it's really important on the jobs front. Lester Brown says that if you invest $1 billion in a coal-fired plant, you get 870 jobs. If you invest $1 billion in solar power, depending on whether it's solar thermal or photovoltaics, you get 1,800 to 1,900 jobs. If you invest $1 billion in wind power, if you actually manufacture and assemble the windmills in the jurisdiction where they're put up, you get 3,300 jobs. If you invest $1 billion in energy efficiency, you get 6,000 jobs. America has lost 6.7 million jobs in this recession. President Obama, when he presented his stimulus package to the Congress, said that we had to generate 3 to 3.5 million jobs for Americans to feel that the recovery had begun. The Federal Reserve virtually announced yesterday that the recession was over. It may be. But if you look at past recessions, here's what happens. The stock market goes up for 6 months. That's happened. Then you get positive GDP numbers for 6 months, which may be about to happen. And only after a year do you see substantial hiring. And in this case, because so much wealth disappeared so quickly, $30 trillion across the globe between September 15th and January 1st, and because there are still pockets of real financial instability within the United States, the trend may be even delayed. But you can readily understand why. If you had layoffs in the last year and people just became more productive and productivity is way up in America, or if you were running a small dry cleaning establishment and you had yourself and 3 employees and you had to lay 2 of them off, it was a wrenching experience, and you're going to be awfully careful before you hire somebody back for fear you'll have to lay them off again. So in that sort of environment, this is the cheapest, surest, most certain way to generate the increased employment we need that will also spread confidence throughout the economy and get hiring going again in every sector. And therefore, every time somebody sees a project on one of your campuses fixing a building, you are having an impact even beyond the fight to reduce climate change and lower your own utility bills. I do not believe there is another option available for the United States at this time that would do more in less time to generate the jobs we need. The Center for American Progress issued a report that said that if we retrofitted 40% of our buildings over the next 10 years, we would do approximately 20 to 30% of what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create not only all the jobs in the retrofits, but create 625,000 permanent jobs. My question is, why in the wide world would we take a decade to do 40% of our buildings when we've got 6.7 million more people unemployed? And the number is far larger than that, because there are lots of people who have quit looking for jobs, so they're not in the unemployment calculations. And there are an enormous but uncounted number of people who are working part-time who would like to be working full-time. We could mobilize the energies of America, put more women in construction, which is always a big issue, something that's needed to be done, and create a whole new cadre of America's economy if we did this right. So that is the context in which the partnership between our foundation and this organization should be seen. When we launched our partnership in 2007 to accelerate the implementation of large-scale energy-efficient retrofits in higher education, we committed to support the signatories by providing assistance with designing projects, access to best practices and contracting terms and conditions, assistance in financing options, and introductions to energy service providers, technology suppliers, and financiers. So far, we've worked with more than 2 dozen of your members, including, I'll just mention a couple of examples. Lee College in Houston, Texas is investing $36 million to upgrade lighting, add solar window film, implement water conservation measures for 35 buildings. The project will complete construction by the end of this year and will reduce energy and maintenance costs for the school by 32%, reducing CO2 emissions by 4,000 tons a year. The University of Central Missouri in Warrensburg is retrofitting 29 buildings, including everything from new lab air systems and controls to new roofs and windows to energy-efficient geothermal ground source HVAC systems. The work will take 2 years, and the university has a great interactive website, which I've actually seen, that allows students and community members to track savings, hoping to get people in the community to follow suit, something I hope you will all be able to do with what you're doing on your campuses. We're also working with schools in Hong Kong, Seoul, Bangkok, London, Toronto, and Mexico City to help them develop energy efficiency projects in connection with our C40s commitment. The climate change initiative that our foundation has undertaken began actually with a contract we signed with this C40s group. It's 40 of the biggest cities in the world on 6 continents, and we do everything from energy retrofits to street lightings to helping the ports become more efficient to helping them close their landfills, recapture methane gas, burn the solid waste for electricity, recycle the rest, do clean public transportation. We do a lot of things in these cities, but the universities in these cities have asked us to help make them leaders in the effort, and so we've worked with them. In addition to that, we've done some big private projects. My favorite one is the work we did with a wonderful team on the Empire State Building, which, as all of you know, is probably the most famous building in America now. It was built in 1931 in the teeth of the Depression. And working with Johnson Controls and others, We have a design that will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 38%. It will cost $33 million. It's going to be self-financed. We didn't have a financing problem there because everybody wants to be there. The rent's pretty good, and the owner's going to self-finance this. But it will save $4.5 million a year in utility bills, be paid off in 7.5 years, after which the bills will just go down that much. And this is very interesting. Will have the equivalent effect just that one building of taking 19,000 cars off the road. So we're hoping that it will get other New York buildings to get into this more rapidly. We're also working to retrofit the entire Public Housing Authority of New York, the largest in the United States. I met yesterday with representatives of the government of Puerto Rico who are doing the same thing on the Puerto Rican Public Housing Authority. It's the second biggest public housing authority in the United States, and they asked me to help them. They want to make the entire island self-sufficient. And that's a very important deal. For those of you who know about American tax law, we give big tax incentives for manufacturers that will go to Puerto Rico and put up jobs. And the standard of living is lower there, so the wages are lower. But almost all the wage gain that people hope to realize by moving to Puerto Rico has been taken away by the fact that they import 100% of their energy and almost all of its oil. But virtually every island in the Caribbean could become totally energy self-sufficient with the right kinds of investments, and I'd like for Puerto Rico to be the first for obvious reasons. I just had a meeting of our C40s group in Seoul, Korea, where we announced that we had approved 16 projects to be certified as totally carbon neutral. There's 16 projects in 10 cities on 5 continents that are residential or commercial or mixed use, including one massive one in London. Every single one of them will be profitable and will have 0 emissions. So I'm hoping that when we begin new buildings, and I know one of the commitments of this organization is to move to 0 emissions institutions. It's easier with the new buildings, but quite possible with existing ones. My library is the only Platinum LEED building in the entire federal system. And I have urged the federal government, I have not just the only presidential library, the only federal building, but I have urged the federal government not only to try to upgrade all of our buildings to that level, but not to approve any new federal building, no new courthouses, no new post offices, no new anything that doesn't meet at least a LEED standard. We should be moving toward federal buildings that are totally energy neutral. Meanwhile, we come back to the principal barrier in the private sector and increasingly in the public sector, which is the financing. We signed a contract with my home state of Arkansas where the governor wants to retrofit every state building, every school, every university, every public building at the local government level to try to put the state at the forefront of this effort. And we're trying to work through the financing. Now, before the bank collapse, after Lehman Brothers failed in September, we had a great deal going. And this is something you could all help on, whether you need it or not. A lot of you have bankers on your boards. So I want to try to explain this. This is really worth focusing on because the absence of parallel financing is a huge problem. The best solution is what is called in the area of utility regulation decoupling, where a utility does not have to sell more electricity to charge more. So instead can finance efficiency and then split the savings with the homeowner or the business owner or the building owner. California did that 35 years ago. PG&E has done it a lot. And it's one of the reasons that energy efficiency in California is the highest in America. The average Californian uses 55% as much energy per year as the average American. In California, it's not only efficiency, but the utilities have the power there. The universities in California are renting their roof space to utilities, and the utilities own the solar panels and pay the universities to put them up so they can finance it over 20 years instead of your traditional loan of 3 years or 5 years. That's the best system. I passed decoupling as a possibility in Arkansas over 30 years ago, but I never had the power to convince the utilities or the Public Service Commission to actually do it. And when oil was cheap and the coal was cheap, nobody wanted to do it. But the governor there now is pushing this, and the utility is actually thinking about doing it there, and they don't have to change the law. Puerto Rico just decided to do it. Failing that, the next best option is to find some other way to string the financing out for a longer period of time. And there are some other interesting options. In Berkeley, because it's not being widely done in Northern California, people can finance this on their property tax bills over 20 years. The Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, told me a couple of days ago that he was also trying to get it folded into mortgages in some places. So you could finance it over 20 years, since even if you didn't own your house for 20 years, the subsequent owner would also benefit. There is a project being developed in Nebraska where all the power is publicly owned, to have the public power companies just basically reduce your bill by the amount of energy savings and substitute for it the bill of the contractor who does the work until the bill is paid off, but the homeowner pays no more money. But if you have decoupling, they can actually share the savings right away, so that if you have 30% savings, you can make a deal that instead of paying the loan off in 5 years, you'll pay it off in 10. You get 15% reduction right away, and the other 15% goes against the debt. Now, if that's not an option, the next best option is this. It's the one we had before the bank collapse. I got 5 banks to commit $1 billion each, $5 billion, to give longer-term financing to building retrofits of a scale, as long as an energy service company guaranteed it. Now, a lot of you have done this work on your campuses, and you routinely work with these energy service organizations. The big ones are Siemens, Johnson Controls, Honeywell. There are 5 other big ones in the world that do this work. Before the bank collapse in September, these banks committed that they would fund any large-scale project that these energy service companies would guarantee. And the average savings is 30%. The good news is, once they guarantee it, you always save more than you say you're going to, because they don't want to have to pay the difference. So it's an incredibly efficient way to do this. Then the bank, with a big company like that guaranteeing it, would give longer-term financing, paid for only out of energy savings, so that the utility ratepayer was in a just say yes position. Your only inconvenience is whatever has to be done to fix the building. Otherwise, you just say yes. You don't have to go get any more money. Now, what happened when the bank collapse occurred is banks became worried about their other bad loans. They got skittish about making any loans. They thought even big energy service companies could fail if General Motors could fail. So everything got frozen up. The question is today, how to unfreeze it. Because today in the United States, banks have today more than $900 billion in cash uncommitted to loans. That is, in theory, they could make $9 trillion in loans tomorrow. Think that would end the recession? The president's stimulus package was $787 billion. That'll give you an idea of the potential of the private financing here. Now, as a practical matter, you can't criticize the banks for not doing that, because they're still worried that some of the loans they have outstanding will get bad. They're still worried they don't have that much loan demand out there now. There are all kinds of issues. We still haven't cleaned up all the mortgage problems, and That's one thing I think the federal government will have to do more on. But you get it. I mean, there's $900 billion out there just sitting there, and all of you sitting around figuring out, how in the wide world am I going to finance this, especially if I lost 30% on my endowment when the market went down and it hasn't recovered yet. So what I have discussed with several governors and the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Energy, and soon the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And what I hope to get the Congress to do, but if they don't do it, we can do it by state levels, is to set up a guarantee fund like the Small Business Association, the SBA Guarantee Fund. If you set aside money, I'll just give you an example. In the last stimulus bill, $18 billion was set aside for building retrofits. Do the numbers. If you get 6,000 jobs per $1 billion, that's 108,000 jobs, right? Something like that. If that money had gone into a guarantee fund at 10 to 1, and you could go to every bank in America and say, okay, now, here's our project, here's what it'll save, it's backed up by Johnson Controls and by a guarantee fund, then instead of $18 billion, you could have $180 billion. Then instead of 108,000 jobs, you have more than 1 million jobs. And you're a third of the way home to the goal the president said we had to reach in order for America to really begin its full comeback. So everywhere in America, we've got to find ways to unlock this financing. It's ridiculous. You can get 20-year financing for a coal-fired power plant, but when we fix the Empire State Building, we're giving a mini power plant back to the utility. If you build a nuclear plant, you can get 30-year financing for it. We have to unpack this. So maybe we need your business schools and your finance departments involved in this, along with all the environmental studies people. But I think that for all the good we're doing, we're just piddling compared to what we ought to be doing and compared to what we could be doing. Think about it. 6.7 million jobs lost, and all this work out there just laying on the ground, begging to be done with an absolute certain high return. So I would like to say to all of you, if we're not doing a good job for you and we should be doing more, you let me know. If you still have financing issues or other things you'd like our help on, let me know. But I am anxious to speed this up. I still think we are doing, for all the good you're doing, we should be doing by 3, 4, 5, 10 times what we're doing as a country. And look, I can't wait for the electric car. And one of the things I'd like to see the government do is go to a $10,000 incentive. Look how this cash for clunkers deal went over like a gangbusters, right? If we did an electric car swap for any kind of car that got 25 miles a gallon or less, it would do the same thing. If you did the money, you could do $10,000 for 2 years, go to $7,500, and go to $5,000 as the relative price differential dropped and the volumes went up. I'm interested in that. I'm working trying to build big solar thermal options in western India, in the desert there, and in the Australian desert, in the southwest United States. I think we've located places where we can actually capture carbon off the coast of the Netherlands, and actually one site in southwestern Pennsylvania and 2 or 3 other places that are relatively accessible and relatively inexpensive. But the least sexy thing has the highest return. Energy efficiency gives you more jobs and more savings for less money than any of that stuff that may be more intellectually stimulating, but will do less to save the planet for our children and grandchildren. So I just want to say, I would like to do more, and I hope that you will help. One final thing. We've done a lot of work on energy at the Clinton Global Initiative, which meets at the opening of the United Nations every year, and this will be our 5th year, and we've gotten 1,400 commitments from thousands of people to spend $46 billion over a decade. Already, these things in education and healthcare, in poverty reduction, and fighting climate change have affected 200 million people in 150 countries. And the vast bulk of the money has been spent in energy. We also started 2 years ago, and many of you participated, in a global initiative for university students. We had our first meeting at Tulane University in New Orleans, then we met at the University of Texas, and we're going to meet this next year at the University of Miami. And I have the date here on April 16th through 18th in 2010. All the students who come, and many of the universities, have made commitments in a large percentage of them have been in energy. So they've helped to accelerate the conversion of our institutions of higher education. So the other thing I'd like to do is to invite all of you to participate in the CGI University next year, if you haven't in the past, and to bring your students, because I find that the more young people we get involved in this, the more we create a climate for changing the community as well as the university, and for also working all across the world. And let me make just one point in closing. I was often criticized by some people in the press, and still am on occasion, for being too interested in little things. All I know is if you do a million little things, you have done a very big thing. And I think the details matter here. You know, I could give you some passionate speech about Copenhagen, but the truth is, you and I don't have a vote there. And the older I get, the more impatient I get with the sound of my own voice, and the more desirous I am of actually doing something that really makes a difference. So I urge you not to be deterred by thinking you can't solve the whole problem. This problem is a problem that has to be solved by billions of people doing what they can do. So I want to leave you in a good humor. I'm going to show you something. One of our biggest problems, as I said, is deforestation. It's a huge problem in poor countries, principally because Brazil's an exception. There where people clear the rainforest to raise cattle or grow soybeans. Most places, poor folks cut down trees for charcoal so they can stay warm in the winter and cook dinner. They have no other way to do it. It's a huge problem in Haiti, and I just agreed to go back to Haiti and work for a couple of years as the UN Special Envoy to try to help the best government they've had in the 35 years I've been going there modernize the country. And one of the things that we're doing, like we did in South Asia after the tsunami, is trying to merge the government efforts with the non-governmental groups, including the local citizens groups. So I went out into this very large neighborhood in Port-au-Prince, which had been poor with a very high crime rate, where there has recently been a precipitous drop in the crime rate. And if you go to Port-au-Prince now, you see they had 4 big hurricanes last year. It took 15% off the GDP of the country, and the trash and the residue is still everywhere. So the first thing everybody's got to do is to try to get ready for the new storm season so this kind of damage doesn't get done. And the government's done a great job of putting people to work, cleaning out the waterways so that we don't have mass flooding as we did last year. But there's a 27-year-old man who organized a community council of 9 people with whom I met in this neighborhood to collect garbage, sort it for the first time into organic paper, plastic, metal, and glass. They're making organic fertilizer for Haitian farmers, low cost, high impact. And so far, given the market in the world, they're just collecting the recycled plastic, metal, and glass. However, they're shredding the paper, wetting it, mixing it with sawdust from a local furniture manufacturer who gives it to them free just to get rid of the stuff. And they developed a handheld press, so they put all this paper sawdust mix in canisters like this, and they put them under this press, and they press all the water out once they have mixed it. they slice it and dry it and produce this. I want to show you this. One of those little things. This is nothing but paper and sawdust. Then they go door to door and they sell these things to poor people. If you buy 4 of them, it costs you 4 cents. With 4 of them, you can cook dinner in Haiti on a dinner pot. If you use charcoal to do the same thing, it costs you 5 times as much. So this little project employs somewhere between 20 and 30 times as many people as it takes to cut down trees, slice them up, make charcoal, to collect garbage, sort the garbage, and make the product. You sell the product for 1/5 as much, and you remove all the incentive to tear the trees down. This could be done in every city, in every poor country in the world. It would do an enormous amount to reduce deforestation and to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions. And it all starts with something that cost a penny that a 27-year-old guy figured out how to do. In a country with a per capita income of $770, where 75% of the people live on $2 a day or less. The young people of the world can save it for themselves and save us from our excesses. And the best and the brightest are with you. So don't overlook the little things, and don't let people ever convince you that there is anything more important than staying with this efficiency movement until we have done it to 100% of the standing structures in America, and we have changed drastically what you have to do to put up a new one. Thank you very much.
What time is it?
Tony Nelson.
Tony, did you have any announcements you want to make? Ah, she's right here. We'll just take a break.
We have another break?
We're gonna take a short break. Yeah, we'll take a short break. So it's 10 off. Yeah, let's come back. Can we come back in 15 minutes, gang? Give everybody a chance to stretch their legs. It'd be nice if you come and sit at a table with yet another group of people. Okay? 15